Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed those images that was scrolling across your screen there. They were taken by a legendary Madison Square Garden photographer, George Kalinsky. It's hard to believe they were taken 50 years ago. I'm Larry Torres. I'm with the Madison Square Garden Public Relations Office, and I want to welcome you to today's special webinar celebrating the 50th anniversary of Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, the fight of the century, March 8th, 1971, live from Madison Square Garden. I want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time out to share their stories with us today, and thank all of the media for joining us as well. It looks like there's quite a few of you. Just a quick little bit of house cleaning here. We will have some time to answer some questions, so please use your chat feature on your screen, indicate who the question is for, and then ask the question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can at the end of the program. Just a quick little note, we are still waiting on Bernard Hopkins to join us, but we are going to get it going. And before we listen to the panelists, let me please introduce the man currently overseeing boxing at Madison Square Garden, the Executive Vice President of MSG Marquee Events, Mr. Joel Fisher.
Thank you, Larry. I too want to welcome everybody. I hope everybody and their families are healthy during these crazy times. But we're glad you're joining us today. We're extremely excited. I think, as you know, one of the most significant anniversaries of a sporting event is upon us. As Larry said, it's the 50th anniversary of the fight of the century between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier at Madison Square Garden. It took place on March 8th, 1971. The Garden has had so many, and too many to count, incredible moments over its 140 plus years. But I think we would all agree that March 8th, 1971 certainly sits amongst the top of people's lists of our top moments, and certainly sporting moments. We were really hoping to book a great fight and had some great plans to celebrate the occasion, but because of the way the world is right now, that plan had to be postponed. But I can assure you that we will find an appropriate way to celebrate this milestone in the arena down the road. We have an amazing group of boxing legends here with us today, all with connections to the fight and or the fighters. And I want to thank all of you guys for being here to share your stories and to celebrate this with us today. With that said, I want to introduce today's moderator, one of the world's foremost historians in our sport. He was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2017. He's Showtime's boxing analyst. He's a great friend of the Garden, a great friend of mine. He's always been very supportive. And I want to welcome Steve Farhood. So I'll turn it over to Steve to start the panel discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Joel. And I want to offer you $100 right now for that painting.
There you go.
I'll take it.
All right. I was 14 years old on March 8th, 1971, and I'll never forget it. I was in 8th grade, and I saw the fight on closed circuit TV with my uncle at Manhattan Center, which is right around the corner from the Garden. And I will never forget the Garden that night, the scene outside the Garden with all the mink coats and all the fancy. Hey, Bernard. Bernard's joined us.
Started to,
But I think that in looking back at 50 years, it clearly, Ali Frazier 1 was clearly the biggest sporting event ever. And I think
got an earplug for these?
It still has been, it remains as such. I mean, nothing really compares. And obviously our panelists will discuss that a little bit. So let me get right to it and introduce them. Bernard Hopkins, since you, I don't know if Bernard can hear us yet, but he'll get around to it. Bernard Hopkins, former middleweight, great champion, light heavyweight champion, fought from 1988 to 2016, and he kept breaking his own record as the oldest fighter ever to hold a world title. He was 51 years old at the time of his last fight. And on March 8th, 1971, Bernard Hopkins was 6 years old. Bob Arum had already been promoting boxing for about 5 years, and Bob was smart enough to start at the very top. His first promotion was Muhammad Ali against George Chuvalo. So he not only promoted Ali, he was one of Ali's lawyers, And he actually was in attendance at the Garden on March 8th, 1971. Of course, Bob has been the head of Top Rank, and you could certainly make the case that Bob is the greatest promoter in boxing history. Larry Holmes, world champion from 1978 to 1985.
Not me.
One of the
Okay, but
greatest
they want-
heavyweights of all time. And Larry went 69-6. And he has a special place on this panel because he sparred extensively with both Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali, and of course fought Muhammad Ali as well in 1980. Larry Holmes on March 8th, 1971 was 21 years old, about to turn pro shortly after that. Gerry Cooney, #1 heavyweight contender, fought from 1977 to 1990. He went 28-3, and in 1982 he took on Larry Holmes in one of the biggest fights of all time. Gerry Cooney on March 8th, 1971 was 14 years old. So Bernard, since we have you, welcome. Good to see you. And one of the reasons that this fight meant a lot to you is because Joe Frazier obviously was from Philadelphia, as you were. Can you discuss a little bit the significance of Joe Frazier to Philadelphia and to you personally?
Yeah, not just for boxing reasons. I think Joe and his son Marvis, of course, and Jackie, and they contribute to Philadelphia by being at events and being at different places that has a lot of things to do with the community. But knowing Joe Frazier history and knowing what my dad and my mom used to talk about, going to his fights back in the 70s, and then being around that history, being around that icon, and then getting to know Marvis and then getting to know Jackie even to today, as she sits as a judge in Philadelphia courts. Man, let me tell you, when people say Philadelphia, they think of Joe Frazier. And I wanted people to have that same feeling because of Joe Frazier when I put my DNA of history in the history books of Philadelphia and, of course, the world. But that's what Joe Frazier meant. And as far as I'm concerned, the Joe Frazier legacy meant. But it started from Joe. And even though I believe he's from Beaufort, North Carolina, yeah, and migrated to Philadelphia, and adopted Philadelphia, and then Philadelphia adopted him as his home. I really often heard him say where he was originally from, but I knew he was proud of that. But he also represented a lot of history and represented Philadelphia, I believe, that is a burden, but is capable for those who came after Smoky Joe Frazier. And I'm one of those proteges. I'm one of the products of being influenced and inspired by Joe Frazier in the Philadelphia area, which produced many different class weights of well-respected fighters and champions. And the heavyweight division has always been the head of boxing when it comes to the body of boxing. And Joe Frazier represented Philadelphia and represented that in a high quality of respect.
Bernard, Philadelphia was still is a great boxing town, but I think that when you look back at the 50 years, Ali Frazier 1 belonged at Madison Square Garden. And Bob, you were there, you had a great seat, you had promoted Ali previously. So discuss, when you heard the fight was first made, Bob Arum, how big did you think it was going to be, and were those expectations met?
Well, first of all, you have to give props to the guy who made it happen, which was Jerry Perencio, and with finance by Jack Kent Cook, who owned the Forum in Los Angeles and the Lakers. Up to that point, boxers fought for a modest guarantee against a percentage. About a year before that, I was called to Las Vegas because I was told that the governor had approved Ali and Frazier fighting. And so I had them each sign a contract for $300,000 against 35% each of them of the revenue. And Howard Hughes, right before the Boxing Commission in Nevada was ready to approve that fight, Howard Hughes called and put a kibosh on the fight. So now, a little later, Ali got his comeback in Atlanta against Jerry Quarry. And then Herbert Muhammad asked me to start Top Rank, which we did. And we promoted in Madison Square Garden Ali against Bonavena on December 7th, 1970. And now everybody was talking about Ali fighting Frazier. And Perenchio shows up and he offers each of the fighters $2,500,000 flat. And that was, you cannot believe how incredible it was. I remember Judge Roy Hopkins, because I had done Ali fights, the Cleveland Williams fight, the Terrell fight in the Astrodome. He says, Bob, I'll give you the money and you promote the fight. And I said, Judge, it's crazy. It can't come out, because what I was doing was taking, you see, we were limited to the number of closed circuit seats because it was telephone lines and you only could service 350 locations and only a certain number of seats. And up to that point, we were charging $5 and $10 for the closed circuit. And Perenchio put that on its head. He charged $25 for the closed circuit and ended up making a lot of money, which he was certainly entitled to. And that started his career. He went and bought a television station, Spanish station. And when he died a few years ago, he was a multi-billionaire. And that started from the fight in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, being that there were LA guys behind the fight.
Again, and it was really interesting because Perenchio put the fight in Madison Square Garden because of pressure from Joe Frazier and Yank Durham, who were loyal to the Garden. They insisted the fight be in the Garden. So Perenchio, knowing the demand or sensing the demand, wanted to charge $500, which is the equivalent of $5,000 now, a seat. And Harry Markson, who ran the boxing in the Garden, said, absolutely not. Limit is $100. And Perenchio balked at it. And Teddy Brenner, who was the matchmaker, interceded, and they agreed on $150 a ticket. And obviously, you know, I had 6 of the best seats in the place, the high rises, you know, right at ringside. And I was offered $2,500 a ticket, which meant I had 6 tickets, $15,000. Lawyers weren't making that in a year. And, but I went and with my then wife and my partner then, Fred Hoffheinz, and his wife. And again, it was the magical night that I will never, ever forget.
Bob, because you were there and you're the only panelist who was there, just paint a little bit of a picture. You walk into the Garden that night. You had been there before many times. You would be there many times after that. But describe what made that atmosphere unique that night.
Okay, let's back up, because we talk about this fight as and rightly so, as the biggest boxing event, if not the biggest sporting event of all times. And the question then is why? I mean, we knew Ali had never lost. He had not been allowed to fight for 3.5 years. He was on a comeback. And Joe Frazier, in the interim, we had done a tournament for an interim champion, and Jimmy Ellis won that tournament. The Garden kept Frazier out of the tournament, and Frazier fought for the New York version of the heavyweight championship. And after he beat Buster Mathis, a match was made with Frazier and Ellis, and Joe knocked out Ellis to be the undisputed interim champion. So there was a lot of boxing interest, but that is not what really made it the greatest sporting event that I've ever witnessed. Because you have to go back, it goes back to politics. When Ali said, I ain't going into the army because I got nothing against the Viet Cong, 90% of Americans were in favor of our participation in the war at Vietnam. As time went on, more and more people felt that it was stupid to be at Vietnam. Now, if you take a poll, I think it's 90% say how stupid it was. But so more people were coming out, and the event became politicized. Ali was against the war in Vietnam. He had been suffered because he was against the war in Vietnam. Majority of Americans, this is early 71, in the beginning, in Nixon's first term, were still in favor of the war. A sizable number, particularly people of color, had been against the war and continued to be against the war. So it was polarized. Right. And I remember, to my shock, that a majority of the people in Madison Square Garden that night were for Frazier, not for Ali, because, again, it was people, the Clover Lake group, all white guys and so forth, who were still, rah-rah Vietnam War, and were for Frazier, and Ali against Ali.
Right.
Now, Ali used that, which is really the thing that I regret most, because Ali sensed what was happening. And he then categorized Frazier as the white man's fighter. And that started Uncle Tom. And throughout the rivalry, Ali and Frazier, Ali used that to get under Frazier's skin.
Right.
But again, it was big. The event was so big worldwide, really, because of politics. And if you think politics today is polarizing, it was as polarizing in that time.
The political and social angles of the fight certainly made it fascinating. I think there are only 3 fights in history that transcended boxing to that degree. The first one was Jack Johnson, Jim Jeffries, way back. Then Lewis Schmeling rematch on the just as World War II was about to begin for America, and then this fight as well, as you put it.
But clearly Lewis and Schmeling, because of the fact that Schmeling was the Nazi fighter.
Symbol.
Joe and even I forget what he was or wasn't, but that's how he was labeled. And Joe was standing up for American values. The Johnson-Jeffries fight, I think, maybe only became significant in retrospect. But the other 2 were significant going into the fight.
Right. Larry Holmes, let me bring you in here. You have a unique perspective on these 2 fighters, because you obviously fought Ali, but you sparred before that with both Ali and Frazier. So you're 21 years old. You're still an amateur, ready to turn pro. Tell me where you were for that fight and what it meant to you.
Well, I was in Philadelphia. My trainer, Ernie Butler, because he knew the people down there, took me down there. And we watched the fight. I was amazed, that Joe Frazier fought and took the punches that he took, and was hanging there with Muhammad Ali. It was a great fight, and I don't know how people made out or whatever, but it was a good fight. It was a good fight for the fighters, both fighters, and a fight that we should never forget.
Larry, at that point, obviously you weren't connected with Ali and Frazier as you would come to be later. If I told you then, when you were 21 years old, that this fight would have the history and the meaning that it ultimately has had, what would you have said to me? Did you realize at the time how big this was?
No, I didn't realize how big it was. I just wanted, a fighter. I wanted to see the fight. I wanted to see them guys get down and do what they had to do. Because Ali talked a lot, because I'm back and forth from Easton to Deer Lake, and it was just crazy. Ali started it and kept it going. Joe Frazier didn't want to be bothered with it, but he had no choice because he was the middle of it. And I enjoyed every bit of it, waiting for that fight to happen.
Gerry Cooney, 14 years old at the time, Huntington, Long Island. Give us your initial memories of that night and that fight.
Well, I wish I could have got my hands on Bernard Hopkins back then at 14. We could have fought together. Listen, that night I could swear on everything holy to me that I was in the Garden watching Clyde Frazier, Frank Sinatra, Joe DiMaggio. I could have swore I was there, watched the whole thing. It was so magical between those two guys. And listen, you had to love Muhammad Ali. But I always was the underdog guy. And, Ali kind of beat Joe Frazier. He wasn't as fast-witted as Ali. And so, during the fight, I'm watching Ali, he's doing good. And then Frazier's coming on, and you couldn't help but root for him. And when he dropped, Ali in that last round, it was like, wow, the guy won, the underdog won. That helped him to win the fight. Had he not knocked Ali down, I don't think he would have got the decision. But also, if you look back on it, this big thing Bob Ann was talking about, the Vietnam War and all what's going on. This was such a big fight that the people in Vietnam and the United States, they stopped the war to watch the fight. So it was just so much involved in it. And this guy, I watched him walking down the airport. I swear he had a glow about him. And I spent time with him at the UN. I once invited him to come to my house in the Hamptons. I was 21 or 22. He said, all right, I will. I wound up canceling because I was intimidated. How am I going to take care of 30 people in my house? But I could have had him in my house. So listen, Muhammad Ali, he's always the greatest. And listen, there's no other better guy than Larry Holmes, who worked with both of those guys to be with today. And I got the chance to fight him, so it's all good.
Hey, Gerry, this is an example of how people rewrite history. I mean, you just said the war stopped in Vietnam, people watched the fight. Let me assure you, there was no satellites at that point to Asia, so it was impossible for people to have watched the fight in Vietnam. But it's a good story. War stopped. all the troops now watch the fight. No, it didn't happen.
You would have got the money from them, right?
Bernard Hopkins, we're talking about.
I'm gonna believe Bob Arum, because if it was, he would have got some pay-per-view influence involved.
Yeah, exactly.
Bernard, you were part of a lot of big promotions in your day, obviously. Can you just begin, from your perspective, to describe how big a fight Ali Frazier won would have been if it happened today, with social media, with technology the way it is? Can you even imagine how big it would be?
Listen, it would be up there with the conversations and the debates about that fight would be almost tied, if not tied, with the pandemic that we had to go through for a year. That's how severe that fight would have been in this era with social media. I mean, my God. I mean, think about it. Think about the resources and things. I mean, if we're sitting here at 21, reminiscing about the past and put it in retrospect of now. I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine? But it played its role. It played its time in its time. And, that's why we're talking about it in 21. Think about it. We're having a discussion on a Zoom, talking about, one, if not three of the greatest fights in history that will never be diminished from boxing history. I mean, that says itself. To me, yeah. I mean, I'm only speaking for me, I'm the baby out of the Zoom. I'm the baby when it comes to numbers and the history that I'm hearing from Gerry Cooney, Larry Holmes, the great Bob Arum, the promoter, and of course, you have to recognize the eras that set the path for fighters today, and the ones that had their time already. That's not the beginning, but that was a big boost for the next to where we at now, really, the next 40 plus years.
Bob, I want to ask you a
And
question
Larry Holmes.
about the perception of Ali. You know, when you were promoting him in his first time around, he was barely touched in some of those fights. It's very rare in boxing that a fighter's image changes after a loss. But given what the punishment Ali took in that fight, and given how boldly he fought in a losing effort, really, even some of the people who were Frazier fans going in, at least respected Ali, if not became Ali fans. Is that accurate? Because of how well he fought and how tough he fought?
The three boxers here will agree that if you got a layoff for 3.5 years, particularly in your prime, when you come back, a lot of your skills are diminished, because it was true. The Ali in the 60s, we used to take bets how few punches the opponent would land on him, and it was generally in the single digits. Now with Ali, couldn't fight for 3.5 years when and they all said in those days in the 60s, great fighter, great movement, can't take a punch, right? Because nobody could hit him, so everybody said can't take a punch. And then when he came back and he couldn't move as well as he did before, he was a more stationary fighter. Sure, he got hit, but what people realized is later that he could take an unbelievable punch.
Right.
I mean, you know, Larry will tell you how hard Ernie Shavers hit, right? Because he hit
The acorn. The acorn.
and he landed some of the best shots I've seen on Ali and couldn't move him. So again, it was a different Ali post the 3.5 years than pre.
Right.
But again, going into that fight, and I was prejudiced, obviously, I believed that Ali was invincible. And I was assured of that because I had seen him fight Bonavena, and it was a tough fight, but he won clearly and knocked out Bonavena in the 15th and last round. And if you remember, Frazier fought Bonavena twice before that. And one of those fights, Bonavena clearly won that fight, and Frazier got a hometown decision. And so I didn't think that Frazier was in the same class as Muhammad Ali. And obviously, in March of 1971, I was disabused of that notion because Frazier clearly won that fight that night. And Gerry, it wasn't because of the knockdown, because in New York then, it was a round system. So there was no 10-8 rounds and so forth. So Frazier got credit for the last round. But even rooting for Ali, I had to fight 9-6 for Frazier.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I felt too. Like from watching the fight as a fan, Frazier took it, and that was just a ceiling. It sealed it that night when he dropped him.
Yeah.
But Larry, let me ask you this. You became, in years to come, you became familiar with both Joe and Muhammad as their sparring partners. And then, of course, you fought Ali later on. If the very best Larry Holmes had fought Ali or Frazier in 1971 when they fought each other, what do you think would have happened?
I would have won, man. I'm not going to put me down. I would have won both of those fights. The referee would have had to stop the fight with Joe Frazier because I'm going to hit him with that jab all day long. And Ali, he was going to run. He didn't want to trade with me. He didn't want to trade. So I'd have beat both of them guys.
Larry, stop talking about that jab. You reminded me about that jab.
I asked Gerry Cooney about that jab. The jab, you know.
Yeah, Gerry, let me ask you this. Some of your biggest fights were at the Garden. This fight, of course, I said before, belonged at the Garden. What made it special that it was at the Garden? Why was that the right venue for this fight?
You know, every so often you go to at the Garden, which is the greatest place in the world, Madison Square Garden. You could feel magic in the air. You could feel the magic around the ring, the air. It was just like, wow, this is the greatest place in the world, and I'm here today to watch this fight. And that's what it was. These two guys were, you know, They were so evenly matched. Frazier, Ali, boxer, slugger. I mean, you just couldn't get away from it. Bob was talking before about Fury and Joshua. The numbers that will do will be phenomenal. If Ali and Frazier were here today, it would do way past that. You have to agree with me, Bob, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, this is now and that was then. So very, very hard. Like people say, how would Ali Frazier do if it took place now? Absolutely great, but it took place then. How would Lewis and Schmeling have done if it took place now? Well, again, it took place then. And I remember as a kid staying in bed late and listening to it on the radio. There was no television then.
Right.
The world marches on.
Yeah, and Bob and everybody said it, that spoke on that is true, because if this, if that, yeah, it's good conversation. But I always say when I hear the F word more than once, if my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle, but she don't. So she's my aunt. So it's good conversation to be talking back and stuff like that. But I think that history is just what it is at that time and place, whether baseball player, basketball player, football player, or professional boxer.
All of it.
That's why I respect that.
A little birdie told me that Muhammad Ali actually called your mom before the fight against Larry. Is that true?
Bob, yes, Muhammad Ali called my mother to tell me, don't worry, it was going to be fine. And, he was just a great, if you got a chance to spend 5 minutes with him, he was the richest man in the world. And it you live off it, you feel it, you rub it around yourself. And I still have it today. Those feelings, those moments. I got in the ring with him one time. We were introduced. We shadow boxed a little bit. And it was magical.
Gerry. He did the con when he called your mom to soften you up, buddy. I'm trying to tell.
Well, there was fighting.
You watched me for many years. You watched me for many years, including Larry and of course Arum. Listen, he got in his head. He figures to call your mom, right? Because I'm a Capricorn. Our birthday's 2 days apart, so we January babies. So Ali called your mom, knowing your mom is going to be excited, but also can't wait to tell you. And you're like, he called my mom.
Well, we got that moment. My mother has always had that moment. It was the greatest.
Good for her at that time.
Let me throw this out to anybody who wants to answer it. The expectations obviously were unique for this fight. The world stopped and everybody watched. Yet the expectations were met, if not surpassed, by the actual event and the actual fight. Would you all agree to that? And how difficult was it to surpass expectations given how high expectations were?
It was magical that night. You can't beat magic.
I agree. Yeah, that's special.
What fight is that? Don't just talk about fight. What fight is you talking about?
Holmes Cooney.
Do we have that fight? Last week.
About 18 months ago, before the pandemic, I was in Dubai, and this young Saudi guy who's in the promotional business was having dinner with me. And he told me this story that when he was really a young guy, he listened on the radio at like 5 a.m. to the Ali Frazier fight. And he said, I will never, ever forget my listening to that fight. And I think that people who, whether they listened on the radio, whether they were in Madison Square Garden, whether they're lucky enough to get a ticket to the closed circuit, which was of course limited because of the phone company limiting the number of locations that could be served, that anybody who either saw that fight or heard it on the radio never will forget it.
For sure.
That says something. That really says something, because there's been fights since, other fights that have been maybe even more action and more exciting, but nobody who either listened to it or saw it or was there will ever forget.
Well, I think that on my list of the greatest fights of all time, I put Ali Frazier 3 in Manila #1. So to have the greatest fight among this rivalry and to have the biggest fight in boxing, which certainly was March 8, 1971 at Madison Square Garden, is pretty remarkable. You know, the guys fought 3 times. The second fight was kind of forgettable. It wasn't a great fight, a lot of holding, not a great action fight. Ali obviously got a little bit of revenge, but to have 2 of the 3 fights be remembered as these 2 fights were is pretty remarkable, even 50 years later.
It is, Steve,
all
but you know
wanna
what? They ruined each other.
We all want to forget the third fight because the third fight was so brutal and each guy took such a beating that they never, ever were the same again. They really, that fight, you talk about a fight taking everything out of a fighter. It was that fight because when Ali later on fought Norton in Yankee Stadium, he was a shadow of himself. And Joe never, ever really recovered from that beating in Manila.
Ali.
Well, I mean, that's the story with trilogies. You know, what do we do about that? I mean, that's the shame about the sport. I mean, people love them, but the fighters bear the brunt of it.
Except like the Ali Norton fight in Yankee Stadium, that was the end of a trilogy. And that was a snoozer. That wasn't a great fight.
Larry, let me ask you this. You got to know both guys very well, obviously. A lot has been made about their personal relationship. You know, we know Joe helped Muhammad out with some cash when Muhammad wasn't fighting. They respected each other tremendously, yet there was a lot of bitterness as well. In your dealings, Larry, with Joe and Muhammad, was there a lot of bitterness, especially from Joe's angle, from Joe's perspective toward Muhammad?
Yeah, well, Joe was mad because he helped Ali. Ali needed some money, he got it from Joe. You know, if he needed somebody to do something, he went to Joe. And he didn't like the word Joe was saying about it because he couldn't take the name calling. Because Joe called him names and Uncle Tom and all that stuff, you know. And Joe didn't like that. So he tried to take it out on Ali when he fought him.
Yeah.
That's what he said he was going to do. I mean, you know, I said, well, go ahead and do it, man, but just be careful.
Hey, Larry,
And
I want to, to comment on that point you made. You know, the 3.5 years that Ali couldn't fight, he picked up some money lecturing at universities. He was in a Broadway show that flopped, that was terrible. So he was scraping for money.
Yeah.
And Joe Frazier gave him significant amounts of money to tide him over.
Right.
And there was not, at least anything any of us could see, an ounce of gratitude from Ali, a fact of what Joe had done. So Larry is completely correct. The biggest blot on Ali's memory is how he treated Joe Frazier when they were competing against each other.
Terrible.
Because Ali shouldn't have been and couldn't have been proud of what he said and what he did. It was despicable because if you look for a proud black man, Joe Frazier was a proud black man. And what Ali did was uncalled for. It worked for Ali because he, as Larry said, he got Joe steamed up. Yeah. And if you're steamed up and you're a boxer, that's not necessarily good for you.
Well, you know, Bob,
and you know, hey, Jerry, you know, one thing Bob said, and pardon me for buying it, but I want to say this because what Bob and Larry Holmes said, what Bob said after Larry, and then I'm saying this, Ali used whatever he can use, right. Whether it was poems, whether saying things to get on your skin, whether it was, they call it rapping now, but he was rhyming back then. Whatever it was used, whether he received money from Joe Frazier, which he did. Joe Frazier did something that a lot of people didn't know until they seen the movies and other things that revealed that. But when you want to win and you want to use whatever you can, whether it's talking smack about you, saying certain things, because I'm gonna tell you, there's a lot of things that I don't have to say when I was boxing that I did say that I don't have to say now. And I believe having that type of spirit as a fighter, and also knowing that it's mental before it's physical. Every fighter don't know that it's mental before physical. They think it's physical and then find out about mental. That's when you're gonna find out the worst way. And Ali was shrewd with it. Obviously, I agree with what everybody said about that. He was no remorse in the things he said that he wanted to get in Joe Frazier's head, because if it's an angry man can't think. With an angry man going to run into that brick wall and realize that brick wall hurt him more than you hurt the wall. And that's what Ali was about, by any means necessary at that particular time.
Muhammad Ali didn't care. Ali didn't have no feelings what he said when he said that about Joe. And as far as helping Ali, Joe would do that. He'll do it now if he can do that now. Joe's a nice guy, you know. And I know Joe. I know his family. I know been around him. And Joe says to me with tears in his eyes, Larry, why did you have to say that to me about me?
Yeah, that really hurt him. That really hurt him, Larry. I know.
No question. I spent a lot of time afterwards with Joe, because Larry knows I promoted his son Marvis, who you knocked out in one round, Larry, with no compassion.
Let's don't talk about that,
Bob. and Joe constantly talked to me about how much he was hurt with Ali's dialogue. There's no question.
You know when I knew this stuff was really serious, Bob, and you might have heard this years ago. You remember Muhammad Ali was lighting the torch in Atlanta, Georgia for the Olympics?
Yes.
Joe Frazier, y'all can look it up. Joe Frazier made, I don't know if it was verbatim, but he said if he was there, he'll push him in the fire.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't believe
I don't know if Joe said that.
Joe.
No, I'm telling you, Larry, look it up.
Bernard is absolutely correct.
I know my history.
Joe Frazier resented, and rightly so, how Ali treated him and Ali's dialogue, which I don't care if it gave him a great advantage. It was out of bounds.
What Joe Frazier said, Bob, what Joe Frazier said is, I've done everything my country has asked of me, and he, stayed out of the war, and that was his story.
Well, again, that wasn't so smart either, because by that time, everybody was giving Ali plaudits for his position against the war.
And yet, let's not forget that when Joe passed away, Ali was right there paying his respects at the funeral.
Steve, let me tell you something, Steve. This Bob Arum got an answer for everything. Only a lawyer can have an answer for that.
But Jerry, I think what people missing is part of what Ali represent, not only as a man, but as his religion.
Mm-hmm.
He was listen, you talking about a Muslim in a United States, right? At that time, right? Even now, but let's go back to that time. You're talking about a known Muslim, the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad. You're talking about a cult that some people look at it even as of today. So that in the 60s, let alone the 50s, I mean, come on, Larry and Jerry, let's keep it 100. And Bob, let's keep it, let's have history along with some laughs and fun, but let's understand what this man really represented. He represented a hated religion in this country, right?
Well, again, I don't want to get into a long diatribe, because Elijah Muhammad is different from Louis Farrakhan. Elijah Muhammad was, you remember Malcolm, who was denigrated by everybody. Malcolm was at the end preaching love and inclusion. And after Elijah passed away, his son Wallace changed that dynamic. So again, that part of the
you know what? You
were
know what?
were inclusive. But I think this is a discussion. I respect your views, but it's a discussion for another time. Really,
Yeah.
it goes a lot deeper than the surface.
They really do. Bob, you're right. They
Let me
really
tell you
do.
something.
So
And
we don't have that much time.
I work
Yeah.
with Joe, and when I work with Joe, I didn't try to hurt him. I tried to beat him up so I could get a raise or look good on his book. But you know what? Joe didn't have no hate for nobody. He might say something bad because you said something bad about him, but he had no hate for nobody. So Joe was my friend to the end. He was my friend, and I respected him.
Let us.
Again, this is really interesting because earlier in the week, I did a panel discussion with the WBC, and we had Neil Leifer on, and Jimmy Lennon on, and Jim Lampley, and it evolved into a discussion about Ali, the great things Ali did, and so forth. Now we're in Madison Square Garden, and we're talking about the Ali Frazier fight, and look how the discussion has leaned completely to Joe Frazier, because Joe Frazier was the New York fighter, the Madison Square Garden fighter, and Ali was the outsider.
You know what? I talk to Joe's daughters a lot, Rita, and she have some things. I wish we can hook her in, and so she can just say it.
At least she got something from the
And
Frazier.
she can tell you exactly what it is, because I was there with him, and she was there because she's the daughter.
No,
And
she
she was coming up, and she heard a lot of the stuff.
Who he is a great champion. Along with Muhammad Ali, they're both great champions that they're never going to be forgotten about.
That's
I've heard
right.
that in small places in Africa, in the mud huts, Ali's picture would hang. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the greatest.
That's why we're celebrating this 50th anniversary as we are, Jerry, no doubt about it. I think you guys have all given us some very interesting perspectives and of a night that will never be forgotten. And let's send it over to Larry Torres. Larry, maybe you can give us some of the questions from the media.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, there was a bunch of questions that come through the panel here. So the first one I'm going to do is for Bernard. Bernard, what can younger boxers today who haven't seen this fight in 1971, what can they learn from this?
She said, "Can you see me?"
What can younger fighters learn from the Ali Frazier fight?
That's for Bernard, right?
You hear me, Bernard?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is for you. So the younger fighters today who haven't had the opportunity to watch the fight of the century, what can they learn from that?
They can learn a lot. They can learn what it's really about to put all of it on the line, and also be prepared mentally and physically. And one important thing they can learn is if they want to be remembered as just being somebody in the game, then somebody that left a mark, left a history in the sport that they are involved in, then they can learn a lot from that to strive to be great, because it's been thrown around kind of loosely now. But if the ones that really understand what greatness means, you will look at the great Larry Holmes, the Gerry Cooneys, and you will look at the fighters, sports, great athletes, and you would take that as a blueprint to be that great or even greater.
Look, along what you said, Bernard, ABC Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern will play the entire fight in its entirety. So young people who haven't seen it, who want to soak up the atmosphere, 2 p.m. Eastern on ABC this Sunday the anniversary of the fight.
And you know what? I want to say this. Bob, you was a great promoter. You still are a great promoter. The Don Kings, you guys fight just like we fight, trying to get ahead. But I love the fact that we have a guy like Bob Arum around, because Bob Arum will pay you a little bit more than another guy will pay you, and he will treat you a little bit better than another guy treat you. So, you know, that's the way it is. And I've been in it with everybody. So I don't have nothing to say, but I'm glad that I got a chance to see you and say that to you on the.
I appreciate it, Larry, and it was great, even though it was just a couple of fights. It was great doing promotions for you.
Yes.
We really got along and had a good time.
Well, listen, Bob, I don't want to tell you, I don't want to, fill you up too much, but I wish you could have been my promoter and got me the right fights to develop me the way I need to be developed.
You'd have kept him away from me, Bob. You'd have kept him away.
Okay, I got a next question here, and Bob, correct, you are the greatest promoter, and you've seen hundreds of fighters, if not thousands. Who, in your eyes, could be the next Ali or Frazier?
We don't want to be the next Ali.
That ain't gonna be. I mean, who will be the preeminent heavyweight? That remains to be seen. I mean, Tyson Fury, if he beats Joshua twice, will have a claim. He's a larger-than-life person, great personality, but he's no Ali, And there's a kid that we've been showing on ESPN, Jared Anderson, who I think, he's a young 23-year-old kid who I think will be the next heavyweight champion from the United States, but we'll have to see. But if you ask me who is the next Ali or who is the next Frazier, there ain't no next.
No.
Just who is the next Larry Holmes or Gerry Cooney? There ain't no next. They are what they are.
Thank you, Bob, for saying that. Because they need to know that we did what we had to do then, and this is now.
Exactly.
Larry, stop ducking me. Stop ducking me, Larry.
Buy me a cornbread sandwich.
All right, Gerry, next question is for you. So at the time of the fight, who did you have winning the fight, and could you picture Ali going down in the 15th round?
No, I think I went into that fight. I talked earlier about, I was a big fan of Ali. I mean, he was just the greatest guy in the world. And Joe Frazier, as the promotion developed, was the workman-like fighter, coming up for the hard guys, the construction workers, the sanitation guys. They loved him. And so I went into that fight, kind of like rooting for Ali. And as the fight went on, Ali took over. Then Joe Frazier came on, and it was close right to the end. And when I seen Joe Frazier drop him, I knew that he took that fight. And it was a great fight because it went back and forth, and they had the will of lions. Very rarely do you see that anymore. These guys that they just going to sacrifice themselves to get that win. I mean, in the third fight, both of them were going to quit in that last round until Joe Frazier, Eddie Futch stood up. That's how determined those guys as fighters were, and that's a gift, man. That's a gift to watch and be involved in that.
Joe was ready to come out for that 15th round in Manila, and he couldn't see. He was totally blind. Both eyes were closed tight shut. I mean, he couldn't see anything.
Joe fought his butt off, man, to the end of it. I was there with him, so I know.
Tough, yeah, tough. Great, Philly.
Yeah. That epitome of a Philly fight. And you then came along and you took over the mantle.
I went to the Boynton Glenwood gym, the Joe Frazier gym. The building is still there, but the gym is no longer. And I remember at 13 years old, Bob and everyone, to step in that gym. My uncle took me there. His name was Artie McLeod. He was a middleweight. And he took me there. He said, nephew, let me take you down to Boyne Glenwood. So he takes me down Boyne Glenwood, and I wound up sparring a guy named Robert Bam Bam Hines, who's from Philadelphia. He beat a guy named Davey Hilton. And I knew right then and there that Joe Frazier's gym at that particular time of year was a place to train at. And I had to come at least 40 minutes to get there. And that's every time I ride by Broad Street and you see Joe Frazier's name right there on Broad and Glenwood, and Larry know what I'm talking about, you, Bob know, and of course Gerry Cooney know that gym. I think of memories and I'm in my car riding up Broad Street to see that legacy and that gym, and knowing I was there at a teenager, Bob, at a teenager, and I wanted to be who I became. Yeah. I went through some adolescence, but I wanted to be who I became. And you know what? That is not about me. It's about Ali. Ali took his steps. Joe Frazier took his step. Those two, I believe, and I know would be joined to the hip until the end of the world, because those three fights was remarkable, was more than that. It was legendary and will never erase from the history of our sport,
So
well, you know what I thank you, Bob, for being a promoter, for putting up with us guys, because I know it's a hard job. But you keep doing what you're doing. God bless you.
But hold up.
It's really made my life. Yeah, it really made my life, because my association with you guys, with other fighters, that's been my life. And people say, do you regret not having stayed in the law, maybe being a judge? And the answer is no. I've had a great life. I continue to have a great life. And the association with fighters has really helped. I mean, sometimes they get you aggravated, but that goes with the territory.
Hey, Bob, since Larry Holmes then already put his out there, I want to thank you also, because you paid me more for one fight with Oscar De La Hoya than I ever got for any fight in my career. So you will always be the one I remember. When I look at that check that I framed in my office in Delaware, I'll be like,
you didn't cash it? You didn't cash it? I have all that money?
No, I
you cashed
the check.
Right. Yeah.
The check been deposited an admissible bond after taxes and expenses.
Right.
Hey, Steve.
In retrospect, any money that I paid you guys, you earned. I think it was fair, the compensation that I paid.
Yes,
and
it was.
And I'm delighted. I'm delighted that Larry was happy, that you were happy. I think Gerry I had for one fight with George Foreman, and he got paid well. But that's what it should be. Fighters are the ones that make the sport, and fighters are entitled to the lion's share of the money. Unlike UFC, where fighters get 20% of the revenue.
Yes.
In boxing, as you know, fighters get 80+% of the revenue.
Yes.
And that makes our sport different from a monopoly like UFC.
Steve Farhood, I want to just tell you should have brought a referee in here today. We need a referee to separate these guys. And Bob, I already thanked you. You're the greatest, bro, in history. I mean, it's just how you land back on your feet and you build a company so big. It's a great thing to see.
You see how this podcast turned into Bob getting his accolades now, while he can feel it.
Well, you guys are rushing to get in the accolades because I'm 89, and how much longer am I going to go? Who knows? That's up to God.
Bob, you've been around for a long time, and you smelling the roses now. You're smelling the roses now. That's why we're telling you this, because you're smelling the roses.
Don't worry about nothing else. Just
God
makes a plan, and he's the best of planners. So you hang in there, just like me.
Let's all get together on June 12th. That's when we're going to do a big event in Madison Square Garden, and you guys all got to come and be my guests. And Jim Dolan will give us the big party room upstairs in the garden, and we're going to do a party,
Great.
and you're all invited to the party before and after the fight.
Bob,
Do
I'm
you
just-
still know how to dance?
What?
You still know how to dance, Bob?
Yeah, you got to believe it.
You
I
gotta
got
believe
I got one more question before we wrap up. I know we've kept you guys a little bit longer than we needed to. It's for Larry Holmes. So Larry, you fought Ali. You sparred with both fighters. Just your overall thoughts on the fight itself, and if Ali did not get dropped in the 15th, do you think the outcome would have been a little differently?
Yeah, I think so. Ali had everybody, you know, it would have went to Ali. It
You know,
would've-
Larry, the scoring was after each round, they made the score. I don't know if they put in sheets, but they had it down.
Right.
And you know, going into that last round, it was a close fight, but
Real-
most of the judges had Frazier ahead, 8-6. And
Yeah, I know. In my mind, I thought I had him that way too, but
yeah.
you know, it's kind of hard to root against somebody that you love and you would respect.
Yeah,
I
when you
know
were in
both
New,
of them
you were
now.
in New York, Larry, the fight was in New York,
I know.
and Frazier had as much love from the
Yeah.
officials,
He
if
did.
not more
In New
than
York.
Ali.
Let me just correct you here,
I
guys,
thought the
okay? Let me
officials
correct you.
Were
Arthur McCanty-
very competent.
Arthur McCanty had it 8 rounds to 6, 1 even, and the other two judges had it 9-6 for Joe Frazier. 9-6. Can you believe that?
Well, that's what I had, and I was rooting for Ali.
Oh, you can say that now. Come on, tell the truth.
No, I had it 9-6.
I'm just kidding. I'm only
Yeah.
kidding.
That's a long time ago. Can you remember it?
He remembers everything, this guy.
Well,
Unbelievable.
everybody watched Sunday, 2:00 Eastern time on ABC, and
We
score
will.
the fight for yourself. Score the fight.
Easy.
And it ain't
But you
gonna
gotta
cost
watch it
money.
first. But you
What?
gotta watch it to score. You have to watch it to score it.
Absolutely. And watch it on Sunday, full fight, ABC, 2:00. in
Great,
the
Bob.
East.
Thank you.
2:00 Eastern.
All right, we're going to send it back to Steve to wrap it up. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, MSG.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, MSG.
Thank you,
And,
guys.
Thank
people
you,
are-
Thanks,
guys. It
Larry.
was fun.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank
See
you,
you
guys.
soon.
Thank you.
See you soon. The pandemic is
Thank you.
winding
See-
down, and we'll all get together.
Yes. See you at
Thank you very
MSG.
much.
Hey, Bob, have a party so we can come to it, will you?
I'm going to do a big party, Larry. I'll have
Hey,
your
MSG,
picture up,
you
I'll have
already said
Gary's picture, Bernie's picture up.
Yeah.
We're going to have a great party
Bring your dancing
in
shoes,
Madison
Larry.
Square
Bring your
Garden.
dancing shoes.
Right.
Yeah, we're gonna
We're
do that.
coming. We're coming, Bob.
Okay.
Steve, what do you got to
We're
say,
gonna do
bro?
Just wrapping it up, Monday is the actual 50th anniversary, March 8th. It's fitting because the fight was on a Monday night. And you guys have all been great. I appreciate the different perspectives. And thank you to MSG for doing this.
Hey, Jerry, I know you don't drink, but you come on down to March 8th to get a drink, because I'm going to buy it for you.
Listen, 33 years I haven't had a drink. 33 years.
Don't drink that corn liquor.
Gary, then come to visit me, and I won't give you a drink, but I'll give you a gummy.
I'm coming.